Well, good morning, everybody, and welcome. Thank you for coming here to Meepleville Meets, another episode. And we are delighted to have this week with us one of the founders and the CEO, the owner, the chief game designer of Stonemaier Games, Jamey Stegmaier. Hello, Jamey.
Hey, Tim, thanks for inviting me to join you today. I really appreciate it.
Thank you for coming. I really appreciate it. So just real quick, I just want to give the audience a quick introduction about you, who you are, your company, and all that. So first of all, the company Stonemaier, your name is Stegmaier. So where did the name come from? How did you start the company, and who did you start it with?
Yeah, a very brief answer to that is I started designing a game for the purpose of putting it on Kickstarter. That game became Viticulture. This was back in 2011. And one of my friends, I was playtesting with a lot of different friends, and one of my friends, Alan, had a great time during one of those playtests and wanted to be more involved. And so he became my partner in the endeavor in starting what became Stonemaier Games. His last name is Stone. My last name is Stegmaier. And we thought the combination of our two names sounded kind of like a German name, and we play a lot of German Euro themed medium weight Euro games. So we thought that would be a good name for the company.
Very good. And is Alan still involved actively with the company?
Alan is still involved. He has a full-time job and a family, and so his responsibilities are mainly just to look at submissions when other designers submit their games to our company. He does a little bit with our healthcare plan, and he playtests. He still is one of our best playtesters. But yeah, he has like a few specific things that he does for the company.
Oh, okay. Oh, very, very good. And also, I just want the audience to know that some of your biggest games, well, not some of your biggest games, but some of your games, in case people aren't familiar with, are Viticulture, as you said, which is why you started the company with the Kickstarter. Euphoria. Scythe was a tremendous success. So real quick, if you could just tell us, how many copies of Scythe have you published so far?
Have we put? I will say a number, and then I'll look up the exact number to see. I believe it last year it went over 300,000. Let's see how many units.
Congratulations. I mean, it's a tremendous game, and very happy with your success, because when I first opened Meepleville in 2016 in January, for about the first 2 years, that game literally got played every single night. Somebody in there was playing Scythe, and it still gets brought out occasionally, but I mean, that first 2 years was just all the time.
That's awesome.
Yeah. And then let me see. So Charterstone also. And then you also became a publisher of other people's games. I know, like Between Two Cities and other things like that. But congratulations on this past year, the Kennerspiel winner, Wingspan, which you published.
Yeah, I published it. I got to Elizabeth Hargrave is the designer of it, another designer, a wonderful person to work with. And I helped develop the game with her a little bit. And yeah, that game has actually outsold Scythe at this point, even though it's only been out for a little over a year. Yeah.
Wow. Well, congratulations to both you and Elizabeth. I was very fortunate. I got to interview Elizabeth about 2 weeks ago, so that was very nice. Yes, and speaking to her, so here's something real quick. I'd like to talk about Wingspan a little bit. So she said, and I'd like to know your aspect about somebody bringing a game to you, what like you saw in the game. And then she told me that you were the one actually who helped add the engine building mechanic. So can you tell us a little bit about that process?
Yeah, so Elizabeth pitched to us, I believe in 2016 at Gen Con, in Gen Con 2016. And at the time it was a bird themed game from the very beginning. And there were a lot of unique bird cards, and they looked kind of similar to how they ended up looking in the final game. But the core idea is that you were trying to play the bird cards. The entire game was built around playing bird cards, and when you played a certain number of cards, the game was over and you count up your points. And I loved the reason that I really loved the game from the start is that Elizabeth had designed so many unique bird cards where the theme of the birds fit the mechanism so well. And this was around the time that Terraforming Mars had come out. And I was just enamored by Terraforming Mars and all the unique cards and how the theme of the cards fit the mechanisms. And so I saw that in Elizabeth. I also thought that she would be awesome to work with, because it's not easy to design that many unique cards, even as an experienced designer. This was her first design. But yes, as Elizabeth said, I wanted the game to have a sense of progression instead of just playing bird after bird. And so we worked together to find a great way to give players that progression, that engine building feel from the game.
Right. And you seem to be very selective, because you haven't published a whole lot of games. I mean, and I'm not saying you haven't as a company, because you're a small company, but what are some of, maybe if you can give us like 3 criteria that you're specifically looking for in a game that somebody may submit to you and you're like, yes, I see something there, and I'm going to go ahead and put my name behind this game.
Sure. Yeah, there are technically 12 tenets that we look at, but I'll give you three. One that actually ends up restricting a lot of games is that the game needs to play as for couples, or roommates, down to 2 players, basically. And even now, all of our games go down to 1 player, but we have someone else come in and do the 1-player part of it. So a game needs to play at 2 players, it needs to play up to at least 5 or 6 players. There are a lot of games that only play 2 to 4 players, or might even only play like 3 to 5 players. Our games need to be at least 2 to 5 players. So that's one. 2 is, like I just mentioned with Wingspan, games that are submitted to us need to have a sense of progression. You need to feel more powerful at the end of the game than at the beginning of the game. That one's in a lot of games, but we do have a focus on that. And last, we need the game to have multiple hooks. We need to have like an innovative mechanical hook that will hook gamers in. The theme needs to have a hook to it, and there needs to be at least one really awesome component in the game that hooks people in and makes them want to get it to their table.
Oh, okay. Yeah, those are, I mean, very good, strong points. And definitely all of your games have those 3 in there. And then just over your shoulder there, we see a box of Pendulum, which is going to be the newest game you're publishing. And I'm sure it has those 3 things you just talked about. So if you could tell us a little bit about your upcoming newest title from Stonemaier Games, Pendulum.
Yeah, thanks for asking about that, Tim. Yeah, this is, we only have 1 new game coming out in 2020, and Pendulum is that game. It was designed by a designer named Travis Jones, who attended an event that we host called the Stonemaier Games Design Day every year, where designers from around the country, a lot around around St. Louis, but also around the country, come into St. Louis for a day and playtest their games and playtest games from other people. And this game, Pendulum, happened to be the highest rated game by the attendees of Design Day ever, that year and in previous years and in future years. And so it caught my eye. Obviously, the highest rating would catch my eye. I loved what the game does. It's a competitive 1 to 5 player game with a heavy turnless worker placement system that uses 3 timers and time optimization with those timers. So you place workers on these different areas of the board, and the longer the worker spends on a certain action, depending on a timer, so they might be locked into an action for 45 seconds, 2 minutes, or 3 minutes. The longer they're locked in, the better the benefit they get when that timer is removed and you get to take the worker off and put them somewhere else on the board. So it's not like a frantic, stressful real-time game, but more of a time optimization game like Sulkin.
Oh, okay. And so since it was so well received, and I don't know, depending on what your feeling is, but how long does it take, say, from initial look to actual publication or finished product? And what are some of the things that steer your decision on how quick a game may come out?
Yeah, that's a great question, because it vastly varies on the game and how the game progresses over time. For this particular game, the designer Travis, I believe, had been working on it for about a year when he brought it to Design Day in 2017. And then we spent the next 2 years developing the game, building the world, building the art, doing lots of blind playtesting for the game, making sure it was as clear, as intuitive as possible. Also making that first play as clear as possible. You know, a lot of people only end up playing a game once or twice unless they really fall in love with it. And we want that first play experience to be good. And so that brings us to summer of 2020, where we finally will be releasing the game. So that's what 4 or 5 years since Travis had the original idea. Some games are much faster than that, but for this particular game, it took a while for us to feel like we had it as good as it could possibly be for the market.
Right. Very good. And, you know, speaking of that, I forgot to mention Tapestry, which was released last year, I believe.
That's right. Yeah.
Tapestry is a fantastic game, but I wanted to talk about something real quick, because you talked about the extensive play testing and all that. And Tapestry is such a really good, solid civilization building game. I definitely feel it hits all 3 of those points out of the 12 tenants you had, but at least those 3 that you mentioned, because down to 2 players, I play with my wife all the time. However, since Board Game Geek, the community, right, it's got millions of gamers putting their input. All of a sudden, when people started playing it, they realized, hey, these civilizations are a little bit unbalanced. And you were like, you know what, guys, you're right. You made an errata. So I'm kind of wondering, what was maybe the flaw in maybe play testing, or what happened? Like, how did that happen?
Yeah. Thank you for asking about that. So one of the things that I knew when designing Tapestry, which has 16 different asymmetric civilizations, is I knew that no matter how much blind playtesting we did, and we had hundreds of blind playtest sessions, that we were likely to miss something. And so I built in a little thing on the last page of the rulebook. It says, after you finish a game of Tapestry, if you don't mind, go to our website, fill in a little form where you write the name of the winning civilization and their final score. I was basically kind of treating the game. I went in with the possibility of there being some imbalances there, and I wanted the ability to have that data and to fix them in the long run. And that's what happened. We found that there were a few civs that were a little more powerful than others and a few civs that were a little weaker than others. And that data has helped us make slight changes. The change that we've made internally since then is that we brought on not full-time, but we have a volunteer data analyst who now looks at all playtesting data that comes through our system. So when we have a game going through the blind playtesting, instead of just me looking at that data, this data analyst does a deep dive into it and finds things that I wouldn't otherwise know to find. And so when we have the Tapestry expansion coming out in a few months, that data has been analyzed much deeper than the original playtest data, even though the number of playtests is about the same.
Right. And I noticed you said that, you play tested a lot and people discovered it. But when the Board Game Geek community got back to you, was there anything that you were like, wow, I just didn't see that at all? Like, were you surprised about anything, or were these kind of things you knew may be a potential problem?
No, I mean, when I published it, I thought that the civs were close enough that that any experienced player would be competitive against other experienced players, and that any new players probably wouldn't notice the very, very small differences between the civilization. It is an engine building game though, and so the things that we miss with two factions in particular, maybe three, just end up being like little things that make a small difference at the beginning of the game. But because you play over 5 income turns over the course of the game, by the end of the game, they can have a much bigger impact. So I definitely miss those civilizations that in hindsight look a little bit more obvious now that I've seen that. But yeah. Yeah, I didn't publish it knowing, oh, this faction is definitely better. We'll just fix it later. Yeah.
Right. So, and also that brings me to one of the really main things I'd like to talk to you about here. So you even said in the rule books of Tapestry in the last page, you put something there, hey, suggestions are doing whatever. You have led your publishing company life really as an open book. Like, you have your blog, you have your videos, and you're always available, like you were to me. And again, thank you for doing this right here. But you really live your publishing game life openly. So I'd like to know a little bit about why Jamey, who you are to say, hey, that's how I'm going to live my company life, to be totally open, because innately that's something inside you, and why you do it. And also it must be a lot of work to be so open, to be so reactive when people write posts and ask you questions. You're always available, it seems. It just seems like so much work. So why is it in Jamey, what is it that you decided, hey, this is how I'm going to run my company, run my life, and be so open moving forward, or doing Stonemaier Games?
You know, it's hard to get to the exact why of it, but I know when I discovered it, and that might help answer the question at least partially. It was during, for the first few years that I was running my company, running Stonemaier Games, I used Kickstarter a lot to launch new projects. We haven't used it in years now, but I did use it a lot early on. And I found during that process of writing, responding to comments, responding to private messages on Kickstarter, posting updates during and after the project, that I learned very early on that it just felt right. It felt right to be as transparent as possible, even if it reflected poorly on us, and on me personally even. It felt much better to, like with project updates, it felt better to let people know what was happening, even if it was a bad thing, or even if nothing really was happening at all. Sometimes during production, there's not really any updates to give, but it's nice to tell people, hey, this is what's going on. And so it kind of instilled in me that this feels right. It feels right to be transparent. It feels right to share the good things that I've done, and also I found it valuable to share the mistakes that I've made, so that I can learn from them and others can learn from them as well. So I don't even really know the why, but I just know it feels right for me to do that on an ongoing basis.
Oh yeah, and trust me, I think it's fantastic. I think it's great, but it just has to be a lot of work. Does any time overpower the actual work of designing
Mm.
and doing games, because you are so reactive, and I'm saying it's a great thing, but I'm just wondering if sometimes it's a heavier burden that you've taken on than you may have realized in the beginning. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, I do know what you mean. Yeah, and there are some days I feel it more than others. For example, even just yesterday, I posted a guest post on our blog by Elizabeth Hargrave. She wrote an amazing post that I've learned a lot from Elizabeth, and I learned a lot from this post about. It was largely about women in the gaming community. And I posted it, and it was one of those things where it didn't even take long for me to write this blog post. Sometimes it takes up to an hour, but she'd already written the blog post, so it didn't take me long to write it. But I basically spent all day yesterday reading comments and filtering some comments that were just terrible. I mean, people posting terrible things,
Right.
And kind of moderating. And so I wasn't expecting that. I was expecting to do a lot of other things yesterday, and I ended up spending most of my day on this blog post. I'm glad I did. I think it was a great blog post to write, but sometimes it catches me off guard. And other times I post a blog post that takes me an hour to write and no one comments on it, and I have the whole day to do other things for the company. So
right.
It surprises me sometimes, but I'm glad the conversations are out there. When there's a conversation, I'm usually learning from it, and so I usually take away something good from it, even if it takes more time than I thought.
Oh, no, absolutely. Conversations are great. But again, I just want to, so in your work day, since you making sure that you feel it just feels right and it has become part and parcel of Stonemaier Games. I mean, that is like, you have great games, but you're also an open book. It seems like they're totally intertwined. Is part of your work day like 8 hours, for lack of a better term, set aside where you're like, okay, this is to answer questions and, things like that?
It probably should be. I've had periods where I've had a much more structured work day than other times. Right now, usually I try to get through my inbox and through media stuff in the morning. Media stuff being the blog, my YouTube channel, where I talk about other games by other publishers and other designers. I usually try to get all that stuff done in the morning, and then usually after lunch, I try to spend some time on comments. And then after that, I have time for hopefully running the business stuff, logistics stuff, marketing stuff, and hopefully some time for game design and development. Although game design really ends up so often being a very small part of my job.
Oh, really? Oh, well, even if it's yours, even if they're your game?
Even if it's mine, yeah. It has helped. We made our first full-time hire in January. We hired a guy named Joe as our director of communications, and that has helped free up a lot of time because he answers a lot of those questions online now. But even then, on a good week, maybe I spend 10 hours out of the 60 or so that I work on game design. On a great week, maybe 20. But yeah, it's usually maybe averages around 8 to 10 hours of game design a week, and all the other stuff is running the business and creating content.
Right. Well, and it's funny because it just shows, I guess it kind of speaks for you and your company that the first full-time person you hired was a director of communications. So it just really shows what your mission is, and how you're like, well, like my first full-time employee is going to be the person to communicate more to people. Yeah. So it really puts a stamp on who you are and what Stonemaier Games is, and that's really nice to hear. So I'd like to talk about that a little bit further because, especially about what's going on now in society with the Black Lives Matter movement, and I'd like to know for you, as a white male, especially in the gaming industry, when this whole hit, like it would probably be say May 25th with the George Floyd incident is when it kind of really exploded. But what did you feel as like say a white male, and maybe leave the game design community separate, but what all of a sudden did you say if you sat down and looked inside and say, hey, this is what I want to do personally? And then I'd like to go further after you answer that into your mission and what you're doing now, which I think is fantastic.
Yeah, I'm glad you asked about that. And let me actually talk about I want to answer the specific question you asked, which was my first, the first few things that I did and the first few things that I thought, because I don't think they were the best response. I think we ended up as a company with a great response, and personally, I think I ended up learning a lot from it. But initially, the things that I thought were that I try to include people in all that I do. I mean, one of the tenets, the core principles of Stonemaier Games is that we do not exclude people. We focus on inclusivity. But inclusivity can be somewhat passive. Like saying that everyone's welcome at my table or everyone's welcome to play my games is different than actively reaching out to people and inviting them to be a part of our games. All types of people all around the world. So that was I mean, that's one of the things I learned. But right away, my initial reaction was, oh, we are already inclusive. This is what we do. This is what Stonemaier Games is. The other thing that I did early on, I would say is a mistake. Couple things. I'm going to say a couple things here, Tim. Feel free to jump in if you want.
Okay.
But Eric Lang, very famous game designer Eric Lang, had a blog post where he talked about some of the experiences that he's had in Minneapolis, where he used to live, doesn't live there right now, with the police there. And my heart was broken by reading this post and reading a designer that I truly respect and admire. They could have been anybody, but it happened to be Eric, someone that I happen to really respect and admire. And I noticed a lot of the comments in that thread were people expressing sympathy for him, as I think was great. But I didn't want to just express sympathy. I wanted to ask him what I could do to help prevent that type of thing from happening in the future. I think my intent there was good, but what I learned by actually posting that question, so I posted on the thread, I said, I feel for you. This is terrible, Eric. I'm so sorry. What can I do to help? I was like, I feel a little helpless. I want to be able to help. What difference can I make in Minneapolis? I'm in St. Louis. I'm in a different place. And the response I got from, not directly Eric did reply, but there were a few other people who said, Jamey, don't ask this question. Don't put this emotional burden on Eric. Eric's had to deal with this. It's not his responsibility to help you feel less helpless. And at the time I had a very defensive response to that. Because I was reaching out trying to help instead of doing the right thing, which was, I didn't need to ask Eric for that answer. There's plenty of resources out there that I could have looked into to find that answer, which I ended up doing. But that was something that I learned very early on, that my intent, that it doesn't even really matter. Asking that question can really put a burden on someone, and that I needed to do the work myself. The last thing I learned, I know this is a very long answer, but the last thing I learned is that I've kept a personal blog for a long time now. And the intent of the personal blog is mostly just for me to write about books and movies and funny things I think of from time to time. And I've written the blog for over 13 years. And I've matured a lot over 13 years. I still have many things that I need to grow on and mature about. But looking back upon my blog, I've had some blog entries that were insensitive, racially insensitive and immature. And at the time I thought it was funny. The intent was to be funny, but looking back, it was incredibly insensitive and immature. And so during this whole process and very early on, I had to look back and look at some of those older blog entries and I just to be fully transparent, I deleted them. There were some blog posts I deleted because I was like, this does not represent me at all, who I am today. And even back then, as I'm looking back at it, while my intent was to be funny, this wasn't funny. This was probably hurtful to a lot of people who read this, whether they read it then or they read it in 2020. Right. And that didn't feel right to me. So that's how I started. I know that's a very long answer to your question, but
no.
That's where it started.
Yeah, no, it's a great answer. And again, thank you for being honest. And it's one of those, I mean, there's so much to talk about. We don't have a whole lot of time, and I would like to talk to you so much more about this, but I do want to cover this part of it where there were a lot of companies who made statements. Okay. Mm-hmm. You made a statement. However, what I think was so great and what I was hoping more people would do is you actually not only made a statement, but again, maybe it was because you have the 12 tenants with the company. You made a list of this is what Stonemaier Games, which I guess essentially I could say is you, Jamey, am going to do. And not only did you make that statement, but just recently last week, you put up a progress report. And this, again, is what I am so happy you did, because again, there were a lot of statements. You know that whole expression, you can talk the talk or walk the walk. A lot of companies made statements. One of the ones that kind of really upset me is companies were saying, we stand behind our Black partners. And I wanted to ask, okay, who are your Black partners? Are you just saying that? Because I'm not sure you have Black partners. So don't just say that. So I'm really glad you did this progress report. So if you could tell us again, being Jamey Stegmaier, being who you are, why you made sure with your transparency that not only did you make your statement, but that you followed through with the progress report, and I imagine you will continue to follow through. But I just want to talk about why that was so important and how you made sure you answered your calling.
Yeah, I thank you for asking about that, Tim. And I'm glad that statement resonated with you. That was definitely born from this process. Those mistakes that I just spent 5 minutes talking about, during that time, I was, after an initial stage of being a little defensive because I consider myself inclusive, I got over that and realized that being passively inclusive is a lot different than being actively inclusive and actively lifting up other people that maybe haven't felt welcome or haven't felt welcome. I think that's one way of putting it. And so as a company, even though I do run the company, we do have shareholders and we have people who I turn to for advice all the time, including Elizabeth Hargrave, actually. I think she's wonderful, has some great perspectives to add. I talk to a lot of different people and we put together, and with a lot of the help of Joe, our director of communications, Joe was awesome throughout this process. We put together this statement, and crucial to this statement, kind of as you said, was that I didn't want it to be just a statement saying that we stood with Black Lives Matter, that we stood with Black, Indigenous, and people of color, but that it was also going to be a declaration of action. And that it wasn't just about this moment either. This is a very important moment, but I wanted to, as much as I can do as a small game company and as an individual, I wanted to try to make a lasting difference and not just have it focus on, a one-time donation or something like that. And so that's where the declaration action came from. It even in the declaration, it doesn't talk about us doing something this year. It says our goal is to do this every year. Our goal is to have these different benchmarks of supporting Black content creators and Black, Indigenous, and people of color content creators. And there's, you can, I don't know if you can post a link to it, but there's a link to this. I think there's 7 different specific declarations of action. And like you said, I wanted to follow up on it to show people what we'd actually done so far. And that, I have 11 months to go since I posted that statement. I want to focus on that every month. I don't know if I'll post an update every month. Maybe it'll be quarterly, but on a regular basis, I want to have that public accountability so people can see that we stand by our words, and maybe other people will be inspired by it as well. And maybe I can learn from people along the way who comment on those threads and say, Jamey, you're not sticking with this commitment, or you could do better, or here's someone that you should connect with and talk to, things like that. Yeah. Did you have any thoughts about that, Tim? Anything that you think we can do better with that declaration?
Well, I mean, probably could. There's a whole another conversation, but absolutely. But one of the things I want to applaud you on and thank you is the outreach. And what I mean by that, what happens a lot of times in situations like this is not enough voices are heard. For example, there may be certain voices that fit into this category that, again, maybe you went to and asked this particular voice, what should I do? And people were like, hey, don't burden that person. Right. But I would just recommend, and I see you're doing it, I'm so glad you are, is go to the people who don't have voices, because you don't know me. You've never met me. So perhaps you didn't know that I was a Black voice. And that's why, again, we can bring up Elizabeth, because this is what I talked to her about. I was so glad she did that. And I admitted fault. I mean, I was lazy. I could have done it. I could have put up a Black Voices page. Any of us could have done it. It could have been done years ago, but nobody did. She did. She took it upon herself to do that. And what that did, again, is we're like, all of a sudden, people in the industry were like, wow, there are other Black voices out there. Now I can see them. Maybe, we should hear them and listen to them. So I would just encourage you. And again, I don't need to encourage you because you're doing it. And I just want to say thank you for making sure that your outreach is to the voices that may not already be heard, to let the people who are not being heard be heard, give them visibility, give them equipment, give them sponsorships, whatever you're doing, but allow them now to be heard. And I think that's a fantastic thing you're doing. And I hope the industry takes a lesson from you, or sees what you're doing to maybe take it upon themselves to be held accountable. Because I may know these people and I could say, hey, what have you done? You made this whole big statement. What have you done since then? But it's just kind of talk. I'm glad to see that you're putting yourself out there, which again, you already do, to be held accountable. And you definitely need to be commended for that.
I appreciate that. Yeah, I thank you. It felt it felt a little weird for me to even put that post out there, because I don't want it to be about me or Stonemaier Games. And I don't want it to come off show offy, like, oh, look what we've done. I just want it for accountability. And I
Yes.
think, yeah. So I'm glad it came off that way, at least in the first
Well, again,
place.
I could definitely understand how you may feel that, and of course anybody does, right? Like, that's why people, when they donate, sometimes they want to be anonymous because they don't want it to be about them. And I get that, but again, somebody, in my opinion, had to be the forebearer or to do this, because I don't know. I haven't seen everybody's statements, every company. I haven't seen everybody who's made a statement. So I don't know if there are other companies have done what you do, but as far as I know, you are the only one who is like, boom, here's my accountability. And you are putting it out to the world saying, hey folks, I'm talking, hold me to this. You know what I mean? This is what I say I'm doing. If you see I'm not doing this, now you can hold me accountable. That's what I think we all need to do, is to be held accountable. Because like I said to Elizabeth, I could have made that Black Voices page. I could have done something and I didn't. And there are a couple of people who are, and hopefully more of us will be doing that in the future. And thanks to people like you and Elizabeth, you are giving us a template, or you are giving us now, hey, Jamey opened the door. He became transparent, became public. Elizabeth we can all now do something because these people have opened the door for us and let us say, yes, okay, here's what we can do. Here's how we can do it. So it's great that you are sort of leading the way.
Thank you. I appreciate you saying that. And you also mentioned even just the idea of lifting up people with maybe very small audiences. And those were some of the people that I reached out to, people with maybe a dozen YouTube followers, basically hardly any subscribers at all. But that's because they hadn't. A few of them just didn't have good camera equipment, good audio equipment. Like that, that's a major barrier to actually getting a subscriber base up and running if your video is difficult to watch. And so it felt good and right to sponsor equipment for some of those channels, even though they had a very small subscriber base. Like, it wasn't a promotional thing for us. Many of them probably will never mention us, and I'm perfectly fine with that. I just love seeing their videos and seeing, I know that my camera, or the camera that we contributed, is being used now because it looks awesome now. And I love that this voice is easier to watch because the camera isn't all fuzzy or the audio isn't all fuzzy. Those things make a difference. Your camera is fantastic, by the way. Your audio is great. Yeah.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that. So, folks, unfortunately, our time has been cut short. We have so much more to talk with Jamey about. Hopefully, in the future, Jamey, I would love to maybe, because I know you're a very busy man, and again, thank you so much for taking the time to do this for me. But I would love to maybe continue our conversations in the future, talk more about you, the company, games, and social issues like this whenever you have time. But again, I thank you so much. Oh, I can't believe that happened. Let me cut that off. Sorry. Thank you so much for taking the time to spend with us right now.
My pleasure. Thank you so much for talking to me about this, Tim. This has been great.
Yes, and folks, just remember. So I'm sorry, real quick, Jamey, before you go, if you could please, I know we talked a little bit about Pendulum, which is upcoming, but what I would like you to do also, because folks, I just want you to realize Stonemaier Games has great games. It's a great company. They're always innovative, as you see, with social issues, with games and everything. So Jamey, if you could, please just let the audience know where they can see you on, say, your Twitter, Instagram, YouTube, all that stuff. Just kind of give us a commercial about Stonemaier Games so the audience knows where to see more of you.
Yeah, definitely. I would say the easiest place to get all that stuff, because everyone has their own choice of social media platforms, is to go to stonemeiergames.com. And there you can find my blog about Kickstarter lessons and entrepreneurship and crowdfunding. You can find my Instagram, which mainly focuses on other people's games, and my cats. My cats make a lot of appearances there. My YouTube channel is about game mechanisms and other games as well. Games designed by other people, top 10 lists, things like that. And our Facebook page is linked there as well as our Facebook groups. So if you love one of our games very specifically, but you don't care about any of the others, there's a Facebook group just for that one game. I think that's all the links. Yeah. And Twitter's there too.
Oh, perfect. Okay. Well, again, folks, thank you so much for joining us for another episode of Meepleville Meets. Thank you again, Jamey, for being here with us. Remember to go out, play Scythe, play Wingspan, play all of the Stonemaier games, and look forward to the upcoming Pendulum. We will have that available at Meepleville in the near future whenever it's released. But again, thanks again for joining us for Meepleville Meets. Thank you, Jamey. We'll speak to you soon.
Thanks, Tim.